Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the bustling African city of Tanga, a young boy named Biko stumbles upon an ancient, forbidden book that holds dark secrets and unimaginable power. What begins as a curious discovery soon spirals into a dangerous journey filled with shadowy cults, ancient rituals, and an ominous pendulum that threatens to unleash chaos from the void. Alongside his loyal companions Amani and Zara, Biko must battle the cult's sinister leader, confront twisted manifestations of fear, and venture into forgotten temples and underground chambers to protect the city from descending into darkness. Will they manage to keep the void from consuming Tanga, or will the pendulum's power bring about an era of untold destruction? In the heart of Tanga, where the air buzzed with the hum of motorbikes and the chatter of vendors, a young boy named Biko stumbled upon a hidden library room that no one else seemed to know about. His days were often spent here, escaping the mundane routines of school and the noisy streets. The room was dusty, its corners wrapped in cobwebs, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper. One day, as he reached for a high shelf, a strange, untitled book fell at his feet. The book was unlike any he had seen, bound in dark, rough leather with symbols that glimmered in the dim light. These symbols twisted and shifted like they were alive. As Biko flipped through its pages, he read about a mysterious cult that had existed in the city centuries ago. This cult had used an ancient device called the pendulum to control people's minds and predict the future. But the book warned that this power came at a terrible cost. Just then, Biko heard a faint whisper, a voice calling his name from the pages of the book. His heart raced, and he quickly shut it, only for the whisper to grow louder, almost pleading. He looked around, the library seemed to grow darker, the walls closing in. He stuffed the book into his backpack, feeling an intense need to get out. As Biko rushed out of the library, he didn't notice the figure watching him from the shadows, eyes gleaming with a predatory curiosity. The figure silently followed Biko, blending into the crowded streets of Tanga, their presence unnoticed but ever present. Biko was about to uncover secrets that were never meant to be found, and the city's dark past was about to collide with his own. Biko couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The book's whispers lingered in his ears even when he was far from the library. He decided to explore the symbols from the book, tracing his way through Tanga's oldest streets. Each turn seemed to pull him deeper into a maze of ancient alleys, where the walls were adorned with faded murals that mirrored the symbols in the book. While exploring, Biko noticed a stone slab embedded in the ground, slightly askew. As he bent down to inspect it, he felt a rush of cold air as if something was breathing from below. Biko pried the stone up, revealing a small compartment containing an old, rusty key. His fingers tingled as he picked it up, feeling the weight of something more than metal. It was as if the key was connected to the heartbeat of the city itself. Just as Biko pocketed the key, a loud bang echoed through the alley. He spun around to see a figure in a long, dark coat standing at the alley's entrance, blocking his way out. The figure pointed directly at Biko, and a chill ran down his spine. But before Biko could react, the figure vanished as if swallowed by the shadows. Heart pounding, Biko raced home, the key heavy in his pocket. That night, he dreamed of dark corridors and a swinging pendulum that seemed to grow larger with each swing, filling his mind with ominous visions. He woke up in a cold sweat, realizing that the key was not just a piece of metal, it was a part of the cult's puzzle, and it had awakened something dark. Biko couldn't let go of the key, it felt like it was calling him. He returned to the library, searching for anything that could help him understand its significance. As he combed through the shelves, a loose brick caught his eye. Behind it, he found a rolled-up map, ancient and brittle, showing a hidden part of Tanga that didn't exist on any modern map. Marked on it were locations matching the symbols from the book. Excited, Biko followed the map to a forgotten part of the city, where the streets seemed deserted, and the air was unnaturally still. The map led him to an old well, overgrown with weeds. As Biko peered into the darkness below, the ground trembled slightly, and a faint, rhythmic sound echoed up, a distant, metallic clang like the swinging of a giant pendulum. Suddenly, Biko felt a hand on his shoulder. He jumped and turned around, but no one was there. His heart raced as he realized he was not alone. The shadows themselves seemed to move, whispering secrets in a language he couldn't understand. He knew he was being watched, but by what or who, he couldn't tell. As he stepped away from the well, the map in his hand began to change. New symbols appeared, glowing faintly in the dim light. They led him to a small, hidden door covered in vines, marked with the same glowing symbols. When Biko inserted the key into the door's lock, it turned with a loud click that echoed like thunder. Biko pushed the door open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the earth. The air was thick and heavy, and a sense of dread washed over him. He knew he was about to step into a place where light did not belong, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He took a deep breath and descended into the darkness, each step taking him closer to the pendulum's secret. The staircase spiraled down into a vast underground chamber, far larger than Biko had imagined. The walls were covered in murals depicting scenes of rituals, figures in cloaks, and a glowing pendulum suspended in the center, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air was thick with a strange hum, as if the room itself was alive, vibrating with an ancient energy. Biko approached the center of the chamber, where a pedestal stood with a curious device, a small pendulum made of crystal, glowing faintly. As Biko reached out to touch it, the chamber shuddered, and the murals on the walls began to shift, replaying scenes of the cult's dark past. He watched in horror as the figures in the murals seemed to come to life, their eyes turning to watch him. Suddenly, the crystal pendulum swung violently, sending a blast of cold air through the chamber. Shadows emerged from the walls, forming into cloaked figures that surrounded Biko. Their faces were hidden, but he could feel their eyes on him, piercing, judging. They began to chant, their voices echoing off the walls, growing louder and louder until it felt like the chamber itself was shouting. One figure stepped forward, lowering its hood to reveal a face Biko recognized. It was the librarian from the dusty room, aged beyond recognition. The librarian's eyes were black as coal, and he spoke in a voice that rumbled like thunder. "You have awoken the pendulum. Its power cannot be controlled by the likes of you." Biko stumbled back, but the shadows closed in, their chanting growing deafening. The librarian raised a hand, and the pendulum swing slowed, its glow fading to darkness. Biko felt a pull, as if his very soul was being tugged towards the pendulum. He knew he had to escape, but the shadows were relentless, their hands reaching out to grasp him. In a desperate move, Biko grabbed the pendulum's base and yanked it free from the pedestal. The shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke as the chamber's hum turned into a piercing wail. The walls cracked, and the floor beneath Biko's feet began to crumble. He sprinted up the staircase, the weight of the pendulum pulling at him with every step. As he burst through the hidden door and back into the daylight, the chamber collapsed behind him, sealing the secrets of the pendulum once more. Biko was left panting, the pendulum still clutched tightly in his hands. He knew he couldn't keep it, but he also knew that whatever power it held, it was far from finished with him. The city of Tanga was just the beginning. After escaping the underground chamber, Biko tried to return to normal life, but the pendulum's presence was a constant reminder that nothing would ever be the same. The device felt alive, pulsing with a faint energy that Biko could feel through his fingertips. He wrapped it in cloth and hid it under his bed, hoping it would stay silent. But Tanga had changed. The streets seemed to twist and shift, familiar alleys vanished overnight, and people acted strangely, as if under a spell. One evening, while walking home, Biko noticed that a street he had walked every day was suddenly gone, replaced by a dark alley that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. Hesitant but drawn by an inexplicable force, Biko stepped into the alley. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was trying to pull him down. Shadows moved along the walls, whispering secrets he couldn't quite catch. At the end of the alley, Biko found an old, decrepit building he had never seen before. Its windows were dark, and the door creaked open as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, the air was thick with a strange fog, and the walls were covered in more symbols like those in the book. Biko's heart pounded as he realized these symbols were instructions, guidelines for using the pendulum's power. He started to piece together the symbols, understanding that the pendulum was not just a device but a key to accessing hidden knowledge. It could reveal secrets, manipulate reality, and even alter the fabric of time. But there was a price Biko was not yet willing to pay. The thought of wielding such power was both intoxicating and terrifying. Just as Biko was about to leave, the fog thickened, and figures began to emerge, ghostly shapes that seemed to replay scenes from the city's past. He saw visions of the cult performing rituals and manipulating events to control the city's destiny. The last figure was his own reflection, holding the pendulum with a look of despair. The image flickered, showing Biko surrounded by people but utterly alone, disconnected from reality. A loud crash jolted him back to the present, and the building began to crumble. Biko ran out, looking back only to see the building vanish, as if it had never been there. The alley had returned to its normal state, but Biko knew he had seen a glimpse of the pendulum's true power. He couldn't help but wonder if he was becoming part of the same cycle, repeating the mistakes of the cults that had come before. Biko returned to school the next day, but the world felt off-kilter. His friends were distant, their conversations strange and disjointed. It was as if everyone around him was moving in slow motion, stuck in their own loops. The pendulum's influence was spreading, bending reality in subtle yet unsettling ways. Biko started noticing that the city of Tanga itself was shifting, landmarks would move, familiar paths would lead to new, uncharted places, and even the sky seemed darker, shrouded in perpetual twilight. At lunch, Biko sat with his friend Amani, who was sketching a mural for an art project. The drawing depicted scenes of Tanga, but with ominous changes, buildings twisted into impossible shapes, people moving like puppets with invisible strings, and a large pendulum swinging ominously over the city. Amani's hand moved furiously, as if guided by an unseen force. Biko watched in horror as Amani's eyes glazed over, lost in a trance. "Amani, stop!" Biko shouted, grabbing his friend's arm. Amani snapped out of it, blinking in confusion. He looked down at his drawing and gasped, dropping his pencil as if it burned him. "I don't remember drawing this," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's like my hand was moving on its own." Biko knew he couldn't ignore the pendulum's power any longer. The device was warping reality, turning his friends into conduits for its influence. He had to find a way to stop it before it consumed the entire city. But every attempt to destroy or hide the pendulum failed. It would always reappear, back under his bed, glowing softly as if mocking his efforts. Desperate, Biko sought help from an unlikely source, his history teacher, Mr. Chuma, who was known for his eccentric lectures about ancient myths and forgotten civilizations. Biko showed him the pendulum, hoping for answers. Mr. Chuma's eyes widened, and he quickly shut the classroom door. "This is no ordinary artifact," he said, his voice a mix of awe and fear. This is a piece of the city's soul. It's connected to the very fabric of Tanga, and its power has been dormant for centuries. Mr. Chuma warned Biko that the pendulum could not be destroyed by ordinary means. It was bound to the city, and its influence could only be contained, not eradicated. He handed Biko a small notebook filled with ancient scripts and symbols similar to those in the book Biko had found. "This may help you understand what you're dealing with," Mr. Chuma said, "but be careful. The pendulum's power is seductive, and it will do anything to remain in control." As Biko left the classroom, the pendulum pulsed in his bag, as if it were alive and listening. The city outside seemed to ripple, buildings shifting subtly as if the landscape were breathing. Biko realized that his fight was not just against a device, but against the very nature of the city itself, a city that had grown addicted to the pendulum's power. Biko spent nights poring over the notebook Mr. Chuma had given him, decoding the symbols and trying to piece together a way to break the pendulum's hold on the city. Each page was filled with cryptic instructions, warning of dire consequences for those who misused the power. Biko learned of a ritual that could suppress the pendulum's influence, but it required something he was not sure he could find, a pure intention free of greed, fear, or ambition. One evening, Biko ventured to the oldest part of Tanga, where the city's original walls still stood, covered in ivy and forgotten by most. He followed the instructions from the notebook, setting up a makeshift altar using stones and herbs he had gathered. As he began the ritual, the air grew heavy, and the ground beneath him trembled slightly, as if the city itself was watching. Biko placed the pendulum in the center of the altar, hoping the ritual would contain its power. But as he chanted the ancient words, the pendulum began to swing wildly, emitting a dark, smoky aura that filled the air with an oppressive weight. Shadows emerged from the ground, coiling around Biko's feet like snakes. The pendulum's glow intensified, casting long, flickering shadows that danced along the walls. Biko's heart raced as he felt the shadows pull at him, whispering doubts and fears. They spoke of his insecurities, his desire for power, and the inevitability of his failure. The pendulum was fighting back, exploiting his deepest vulnerabilities to keep its hold on the city. Biko stumbled, his vision blurring as the shadows closed in. In a final, desperate move, Biko grabbed the pendulum and threw it as hard as he could. The device smashed against the wall, shattering into a million pieces. The shadows screamed and retreated, dissolving into the ground. The air cleared, and Biko collapsed, exhausted but relieved. He thought he had won, but as he looked at the shattered remains of the pendulum, they slowly began to reassemble, piece by piece. The pendulum was not so easily destroyed. It was bound to the city, and as long as Tanga stood, the pendulum's influence would never truly be gone. Biko knew he couldn't face this alone, but he also knew that whatever came next, he would need to be stronger than ever. The city's darkest secrets were still hidden, and the pendulum was only the beginning. As Biko returned to his room, the pieces of the pendulum, still reassembling, glowed with a strange, rhythmic pulse. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was communicating with him, whispering secrets from beyond. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw visions of the pendulum swinging over the city, casting shadows that danced like puppets in a twisted show. It was as if the city of Tanga itself was alive, shifting and morphing to the pendulum's beat. Late into the night, Biko heard a soft knock on his window. Startled, he pulled back the curtain to find Amani, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Biko, you have to see this," she whispered, her voice trembling. They sneaked out into the streets, which were eerily quiet, shrouded in an unnatural fog that seemed to hum with energy. Amani led Biko to the town square, where a group of people stood in a circle, swaying to a silent rhythm. It was as if they were in a trance, their movements synchronized like marionettes. At the center of the circle was a figure cloaked in shadows, holding what looked like a newly formed pendulum, its glow piercing through the fog. Biko's heart sank. It was identical to his, yet somehow darker, more menacing. The cloaked figure raised the pendulum, and the crowd began to chant, their voices blending into a haunting melody that echoed through the empty streets. Biko recognized some of the faces, neighbors, shopkeepers, even his own teacher, Mr. Chuma. It was clear that the pendulum's influence was spreading faster than he had feared, gripping the minds of the city's inhabitants. Without warning, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the fog thickened, coiling around Biko and Amani like a living entity. The air buzzed with an electric charge, and the city's lights flickered, casting ominous shadows that twisted and danced in sync with the pendulum's swing. Biko felt a surge of panic. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a ritual, one that could tear the very fabric of reality. As the chanting grew louder, Biko noticed that the figure at the center wasn't holding the pendulum anymore. It was floating, spinning faster and faster, creating a vortex of light and shadow that sucked in everything around it. Amani grabbed Biko's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We have to stop this," she shouted over the rising noise. Before Biko could react, the vortex intensified, pulling at their clothes, their hair, even their thoughts. Biko felt his grip on reality slipping, the lines between dreams and nightmares blurring into one. He reached out, trying to grab Amani, but the force was too strong. They were both being drawn toward the pendulum, their bodies lifted off the ground, suspended in the swirling chaos. Just as they were about to be swallowed by the vortex, Biko felt a sudden jolt. The flash of light, blinding and pure, erupted from his pocket. He reached in and pulled out the notebook from Mr. Chuma, its pages glowing with a soft, golden light that pushed back the shadows. The vortex faltered, the pendulum's glow dimming as if recoiling from the notebook's light. The cloaked figure shrieked, a sound that pierced the air like a knife, and the crowd scattered, their trance broken. The pendulum fell to the ground with a dull thud, its light extinguished. Biko and Amani crashed to the pavement, gasping for breath. They looked up to see the figure dissolve into the fog, leaving behind only the shattered remnants of the pendulum. Biko clutched the notebook, his mind racing. The pendulum's power was greater than he had imagined, then someone was using it to control the city. But who? And why? The answers were buried in the pages of the notebook, and Biko knew that if he didn't find them soon, Tanga would be lost to the darkness forever. The next morning, Biko and Amani met in secret, their nerves still frayed from the night's encounter. The city seemed normal again, but there was an undercurrent of tension, as if the streets were holding their breath. They knew they had to act fast. The pendulum's power was growing, and its influence was seeping into every corner of Tanga. Biko decided to confront Mr. Chuma, hoping his teacher could shed light on the ritual and the cloaked figure. But when Biko arrived at the school, Mr. Chuma was gone. His classroom was in disarray, papers scattered, books thrown from the shelves. It was clear someone had searched the place, looking for something. Amani found a note pinned to the blackboard, a cryptic message written in the same ancient script as the notebook. It read, "The circle is closing. Trust no one." Biko's blood ran cold. Was Mr. Chuma warning them, or had he been compromised? The lines between friend and foe were blurring, and Biko felt the weight of the pendulum's influence tightening around him. Determined to get answers, Biko and Amani decided to search Mr. Chuma's house, hoping to find clues about the cult and the pendulum's true purpose. As they entered the dimly lit house, Biko couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the floorboards echoed like a warning. In Mr. Chuma's study, they found maps of the city, marked with strange symbols and lines that connected seemingly random places. It was a web of secrets, the blueprint of Tanga's hidden power lines. In the center of the map was the pendulum, marked with the word convergence. Biko realized that the pendulum was more than just a tool. It was the key to controlling the city's energy, to bending its will to whoever wielded it. Just as Biko pieced together the connection, a shadow moved outside the window. Biko and Amani froze, their breath caught in their throats. The door burst open, and a group of figures in dark robes stormed in, their faces hidden behind masks. Biko and Amani scrambled to escape, knocking over shelves and scattering papers in their wake. They darted through the house, the robed figures close behind. Biko could feel the pendulum's pull, a magnetic force that seemed to guide the cult members' every move. As they reached the back door, Biko turned to see one of the figures remove their mask. It was Mr. Chuma. His eyes were blank, devoid of the warmth Biko had once known. "Why are you doing this?" Biko shouted, but Mr. Chuma didn't answer. He simply raised his hand, and the pendulum in his grasp began to glow. The cult members closed in, and Biko felt the walls tighten around him, the air suffocating. Amani grabbed his arm, yanking him through the door just as the pendulum's glow filled the room. They ran into the night, the city's lights flickering as if in response to the pendulum's call. Biko's mind was reeling. Mr. Chuma, his mentor, was part of the cult. But why? What could drive someone to betray their own city, their own students? The answers were out there, buried in the shadows of Tanga, and Biko was determined to uncover them, no matter the cost. The following days were a blur of paranoia and fear. Biko and Amani felt the pendulum's influence in every corner of Tanga. People acted strangely, the air felt heavy, and time seemed to bend in unsettling ways. The city was no longer the safe haven they knew, it was a maze of illusions, each turn leading deeper into the unknown. Biko decided to consult the notebook once more, desperate for any guidance it could offer. He flipped through its pages, finding a section that described the mirror of illusions, the ritual that could reveal the true nature of those around him. It was risky, the text warned, as the mirror could distort reality, showing both truths and lies that were indistinguishable from each other. Biko gathered the necessary materials, a silver bowl, clear water, and a piece of glass from an old mirror. As he set up the ritual in the basement of his house, Amani watched nervously, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to move on their own. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice shaky. Biko nodded, but he wasn't sure at all. He recited the incantation from the notebook, and the water in the bowl began to ripple. The surface shimmered, reflecting not the basement, but a dark, twisted version of Tanga, where the buildings leaned at impossible angles and shadows crept along the ground like living creatures. In the reflection, Biko saw himself standing in the city square, surrounded by the robed cult members. At their center was the cloaked figure, holding the pendulum aloft. As the pendulum swung, Biko's reflection changed, it showed him in the same robes, his eyes hollow and empty. Amani stood beside him, also cloaked, her expression void of emotion. Biko recoiled in horror. Was this the future? A vision? Or just a cruel illusion meant to break his resolve? He couldn't tell. The mirror's reflection shifted again, showing Mr. Chuma, his face twisted into a sneer, holding the pendulum over the city like a puppet master. Biko knew then that the stakes were higher than he'd imagined. The pendulum wasn't just a tool of control, it was a weapon, one that could rewrite the very fabric of the city. As the vision faded, the mirror shattered, the glass splintering into 1,000 pieces that clattered to the floor. Biko and Amani stared at the shards, each reflecting a different part of their faces, distorted and fragmented. It was a warning, Biko realized, the glimpse of what could happen if they failed. They couldn't trust anyone. Not even themselves. Biko and Amani knew they needed to act quickly. The pendulum's influence was growing, and time was slipping away like sand through their fingers. They decided to visit the oldest part of Tanga, a district known as Kolala, where the city's ancient secrets were said to be hidden. It was a place of crumbling buildings, narrow alleys, and whispers carried on the wind. As they navigated the maze-like streets, Amani noticed something strange. Shadows seemed to move independently of their owners, stretching and shifting in unnatural ways. She shivered, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Biko sensed it too, the city was alive with dark energy, as if it were watching them, guiding them toward some unknown destination. They reached a dilapidated library, its doors barely hanging on their hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and rows of ancient books lined the walls. Biko ran his fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of history in each one. They were looking for anything that could help them understand the pendulum and the cult's plans. Amani pulled out a book that caught her eye, its cover marked with the same symbols from Mr. Chuma's map. As she opened it, the room seemed to darken, the shadows growing longer, whispering incoherent words that sent chills down her spine. The book contained stories of an ancient artifact, the pendulum, and its ability to manipulate time and space, bending the will of those who sought its power. But something was off. The more they read, the more the shadows around them seemed to come alive, moving closer, almost reaching out. Biko felt a cold hand brush against his arm, but when he turned, there was nothing there. Just darkness, dense and suffocating. Amani gasped, dropping the book as a shadowy figure materialized from the darkness, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. "Leave this place," it hissed, its voice a blend of multiple tones, echoing as if spoken by 1,000 voices. Biko stepped back, his heart pounding. The figure loomed over them, its form shifting and undulating like smoke. They couldn't stay, the library was a trap, a living entity that sought to ensnare them. Biko grabbed Amani's hand, and they bolted for the exit, the shadowy figure lunging after them, its fingers elongating into tendrils that snaked through the air. They burst through the doors, stumbling into the street just as the library's doors slammed shut behind them, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap. Breathing heavily, they looked back to see the library dark and silent, its windows now completely black. It was as if the building itself had swallowed the shadows, hiding whatever secrets lay within. Biko knew then that they were up against forces far beyond their comprehension, dark, ancient forces that would stop at nothing to protect the pendulum's power. As the days passed, Biko and Amani's paranoia deepened. They could no longer tell friend from foe. People they had known all their lives were acting strangely, neighbors avoided eye contact, shopkeepers whispered behind their backs, and even the birds in the trees seemed to watch them with unnerving intensity. It was as if the pendulum had infected the very soul of the city. Desperate for answers, Biko and Amani decided to confront one of the cult's lower members, hoping to extract information about their plans. They chose Kwame, a local fruit vendor who they suspected was involved due to his erratic behavior and recent disappearances. One evening, they cornered Kwame in an alleyway, where he was nervously glancing over his shoulder. When he saw them, his face twisted in fear. "I don't know anything," he blurted out before they even asked. Biko grabbed him by the arm, pushing him against the wall. "Tell us about the pendulum," Biko demanded, his voice low and threatening. Kwame's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. He hesitated, then glanced at Amani, his expression softening. "It's not what you think," Kwame whispered, his voice trembling. "We were promised a change. A chance to make things better. But it's gone too far. The pendulum, it's alive. It feeds on fear, on doubt. It twists your thoughts until you can't tell what's real anymore." Biko's grip tightened. Who's behind it? Who's controlling the pendulum? Kwame shook his head. "Nobody. It controls us. It has a will of its own. We thought we could use it, but it's using us. It shows you things that can't be true, but they feel so real. It's like a dream you can't wake up from." Before Biko could press further, Kwame's eyes glazed over, and he slumped against the wall, unconscious. Biko and Amani exchanged worried looks. Whatever had happened to Kwame, it was clear that the pendulum was more dangerous than they had imagined. It wasn't just a tool, it was a parasite, feeding on the minds of those who sought its power. Biko and Amani realized they needed to go deeper. They decided to infiltrate one of the cult's secret meetings, hoping to learn more about their plans and the true nature of the pendulum. Disguising themselves in dark robes they had stolen from an abandoned cult hideout, they blended into the shadows of the city, moving with the ebb and flow of the night. The meeting was held in an old, forgotten theater, its grand halls now covered in dust and cobwebs. As Biko and Amani entered, they were struck by the sight of the cult members, all gathered in a circle around the pendulum, which hung from the ceiling, spinning slowly. Its glow bathed the room in a sickly green light, casting eerie patterns on the walls. The cult members chanted in low, rhythmic tones, their voices echoing off the crumbling walls. Biko and Amani kept to the back, watching as the cloaked figure from the midnight gathering stepped forward, raising a hand to silence the crowd. "The time of convergence is near," the figure announced, its voice a chilling monotone. "The pendulum will swing, and Tanga will be reborn in its image. All who oppose us will be lost to the void, their memories erased, their lives forgotten." Amani shivered. This wasn't just about control, it was about erasure, about rewriting reality itself. The pendulum wasn't just a tool of power, it was a gateway to something darker, something that threatened to consume everything it touched. Biko's heart raced as he watched the cloaked figure approach the pendulum, raising a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. As the figure poured the liquid onto the pendulum, it began to spin faster, the light growing brighter and more intense. Biko felt a pull, as if the pendulum was drawing him in, tugging at the edges of his consciousness. Suddenly, the room began to warp, the walls bending and twisting as if caught in a whirlpool. Biko blinked, and in that instant, he saw a flash of visions, a Tanga that was empty, devoid of life, the streets crumbling into dust, the sky dark and endless. It was a vision of a city that had been consumed by its own darkness, lost to the pendulum's power. Amani grabbed Biko's arm, snapping him back to reality. "We need to go, now," she whispered urgently. They stumbled out of the theater, the pendulum's light chasing them like a beacon of despair. They ran through the empty streets, the visions still burning in Biko's mind. As they reached the safety of Biko's home, they collapsed, gasping for breath. The pendulum's power was growing, its reach extending beyond the cult and into the very fabric of the city. They were running out of time, and Biko knew that the next swing of the pendulum could be their last. Biko stared at the notebook, its pages now glowing faintly in the dim light. There had to be a way to stop this, to sever the pendulum's grip on Tanga. But as the visions replayed in his mind, Biko couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late, that the pendulum had set in motion something that couldn't be undone. Is Biko and Amani too late? Has the pendulum set in motion something that couldn't be undone? Join us on the next episode to find out.